Oh, well, why don't you shut people up then, because you're a moderator. I've got the conch. All right, James. What's this guy doing? Is he talking or not?
He's a favourite.
Okay, well, I hope I've got your attention now, all right? I've been asked to give a flash speech, flash talk. It's not that flash, it's probably a little bit more than a flash. It's a bit scrappy because it's probably more than 5 minutes, but I'll try and keep it down to no more than 10. On the economics of singularity. Okay, I assume you've fallen asleep already, eh? Now, I don't claim to have a crystal ball, so this is really just mapping out possible, plausible scenario, and feel free afterwards to hack it to pieces. But I think, cut a short story, the news on the singularity, economic singularity, is that there is some so-so news, some good news, and some bad news, right? So it makes it sound like a Jewish joke. And that's a good segue into what I think is the most useful theorist of the technological singularity, who was a Jewish economist, Karl Marx. I think Karl Marx's scenario offers us the greatest possible insight into the likelihood of a technological singularity, because he was a theorist of revolution, both technological revolution and social revolution. No one would doubt that. And he believed very much in primacy of the technology as the driving force of history, which is what we, I think, at least partially agree with here. But he was also believed that it would radically change the social structure, and I think we can also see that possibility. Very quickly, he thought that the owners of the machines would be in a great position as the economy developed more technologically, and he thought that the supplies of manpower would be in a steadily worsened position, and that eventually this incompatibility, or contradiction, as he would call it, would become too much, and there would be a revolution, or a crisis and a revolution, and then everyone would be happy ever after, which is where his religious streak came in. And there's some of that in the singularity too, by the way. But now, that's some of the good news and the bad news mixed together. Now, the so-so news is that evidence of the singularity outside of IT is pretty hard to find at the moment. At the moment, it looks like technological growth is actually, outside of IT, is almost stalled. There's not a lot. There is some progress, but not a lot. Most of the progress that we've seen in the last 20 years has been in what you would call audio-visual or communications and computation equipment, right? But it's taken a long time for it to get outside of those areas, although it is now moving into those areas, particularly in things like cars and machinery, such as the things that James makes, heavy machinery. It's starting to go. But one of the studies, the most influential study on the progress of science and technology, was done by a guy called Hubner a few years ago. He's a physicist working for the Naval Department. He said that the pace of, or proved actually by empirical analysis, that the pace of technological change peaked in 1873, which was actually when Marx wrote his book. So you can see why Marx was onto something then, right? Clearly, empirically, he was onto something, right? But at the moment, we seem to be in a slightly Malthusian diminishing returns. Everyone heard of Malthus? He's the apostle of the dismal science, where he said you get diminishing returns once you exploit a technology to its maximum, right? We do seem to be in that in some ways, as anyone who's spent time in traffic will attest. There are diminishing returns to technology where we all just get into an arms race and just stall each other. But that's the so-so news, right? But there is some evidence now that we are on the cusp of a movement from digital technology applying just to, if you like, computation and communication to the rest of the world, to transportation and mechanization. And that's where I call this the moment where Moore's law, which we all know about, exponential growth in speed of computers, and Church-Turing, which means the universal convertibility of all analog problems into digital solutions. Anyone here not heard of Church-Turing thesis? Just means that you can get you can build a computer to be a pattern recognizer and solve virtually any problem that's computable. Once you combine Moore's law and Church-Turing, and it moves into the world outside of communication and computation, then you're on the path to the singularity. Now, are we getting closer to that path? Well, Quiggin, who's I suppose Australia's best economist, suspects that we are closing it. We're getting closer. And it all depends on a single value, which I will call, in honour of the theorists of the singularity, the omega value. And that refers to the income elasticity of demand for technology. Everyone heard of income elasticity? What, anyone doesn't know what that term means? Okay, that means for every dollar that you generate in the economy, you spend more than $1 on a particular product or a particular class of products. So if your growth is $1 and you spend $1.10 on if you're growing by certain units and you spend more than that unit on a particular class of products, then the income elasticity of that class of products is greater than 1. If it's less than 1, obviously, if you spend less than, it's less than 1. If it's the same, it's proportionate. Okay? Now, Quiggin suggests that the income elasticity of demand for digital technology is now getting slightly greater than 1, meaning that for every dollar we spend on stuff, we're spending a bit more than $1 on technology. Not exactly, but proportionately. Okay? So this is this is good news in a way. This is the good news, because that means that if, as I'm going to argue, we are moving into a phase where Moore's law and the Turing law both synthesize, then we will soon head into a period of very rapid exponential growth. As Quiggin says, it'll make our current fussing about 1% and 2% growth just like rounding errors, right? But there's a problem. This is where the bad news comes. Oh, and also one of the reasons he suggests that we've had so much trouble getting omega over 1 is the old problem he calls, and I think you might have all heard it, Intel giveth and Microsoft taketh away. But we now can see where Microsoft's dominance, and it's acting as you might suggest as a fetter on the growth of the digital economy and its attempt to monopolise it, was initially a help and now it's a hindrance. And we're seeing so many massive companies doing an end run around Microsoft's software dominance, Google, obviously, Facebook, other companies like open source and all Web 2, all the social networking, that means that we may well be able to make this leap into omega with greater than 1, which I don't know if you've heard of omega used in analysis of the physical singularity. Omega of, you want to explain it, James, for them? Okay, well, omega refers to the cosmological constant, whether you get refers to the overall geometry of the universe. If it's less than 1, if it's greater than 0, it's open, you get an infinitely expanding universe. If it's 0, you get a flat universe, just constant, steady, almost steady state. And if it's less than 0, you get a closed universe, which eventually crunches back, right? So it's sort of almost an analog to omega in the Moore's law argument, okay? Now we get to the bad news, unfortunately, and there's plenty of that, I'm sorry to say. This is where Marx's argument starts to come in, because as he was a sort of technological optimist in some ways in the long run, but he was a sociological pessimist. He was talking about the immiseration and polarization of ownership. Well, we're already seeing that now. No one doubts that a tiny group of people are now monopolizing ownership of productive assets, and they will definitely attempt to and succeed in controlling the ownership of high-tech assets of the kind of AI, particularly, because that's the way to make money. And they really want to make a lot of money, these guys. So the problem here is that we're going to have a problem then if this ownership is polarised. There won't be any encouragement to make sure that everyone gets employment, because the new machines will obviously be able to do all the stuff that humans do, only much faster, without going on strike or spending too much time talking around the water cooler. And this is what humans want. This is what human resources want, except it'll be AI resource management in the future. Everyone, I think, knows this. So we're going to find ourselves having a problem finding a link in the value chain as AI moves up the value chain. And this is not just a theory anymore, this is becoming a fact. We've already seen flash mobs in the United States where you might say excluded or underclass elements who have just given up on the job market and have taken to shopping by means of riots. Well, this may continue as more and more people get excluded from the labour market, right? We're seeing some early signs of this, that the structural change in the labour market, but it's been masked by the cyclical change of the Great Recession, which we all know about, the GFC. But whilst the cycle of capitalism goes on, the structural tendency is also going on, and the tendency for the employment of labour, including middle-class labour, may or is likely to decline. There are some straws in the wind. I noticed recently that the United States Post, which was usually, I suspect, the greatest employer of labour in the United States, is on the verge of bankruptcy because the internet has destroyed mail, snail mail, right? Foxconn, the world's largest exporter in China, is now going to replace its human workforce with 1 million robots over the next 5 years because too many of its workers are committing suicide because they can't afford the Apple or something, or can't get girlfriends or something like that. Lawyers are seriously threatened because legal software is now available that can do the search analysis and brief preparation that used to make them all those billable hours in the past. And that's going to kill the legal, anything that's like a routine operation that can be converted into an algorithm, following Church-Turing's theory, can be turned into an AI system, and then the humans doing that are finished. So this will hollow out the middle class, right? Because lots of middle class workers basically punch the clock, fill out the ledger, etc., tick the box, and next please, right? But that model of work is now going to be no longer. The last one I think that everyone's aware of is retail. I have to seriously ask how many people, or how much longer can retail last if everyone does their shopping online. Currently it's still pretty small, and people do like retail shopping because they like the social experience, which is why you have Westfield shopping malls. But they will go to the Westfield for the social experience, and maybe they'll do their shopping online. So maybe Westfield will just become a gigantic theme park, as it appears to be in London now, which is what it's doing. And the final one I think is great is James is working on a mine now, Solomon's mine, yes? Or at least in the preparatory stages, which has been built by Australia's richest man, Twiggy Forrest. It's going to be $3.5 billion worth of infrastructure. No miners in this mine, apparently. They're all going to be machines. But what's even worse, no managers. It's all going to be done by a sort of automated Excel spreadsheet, a spreadsheet without a soul. So this is a very, very alarming prospect for someone like me, who's both a truck driver and economist. I can suddenly find that no miners, no mine for the truck driver, and no economists can work in the management. So, and I'm sure lots of other people here will be thinking the same thing. Do I have a role in this future economy? And the answer is maybe not. And is there, I won't give I have a solution or a magic wand to wave, but I would suggest that the Chinese economy is well placed to, the Chinese model of political economy, I should say, which is authoritarian and not democratic and rather statist, may well provide the best model for this, or the fairest model for this system, because they have the ability to distribute the gains of technology in a politically compatible way. in a politically useful way. And I think it's one of the great ironies of history that the technological revolution that was forecast by Marx may well be brought to fulfillment by the Communist Party that was formed by Marx. And that's it. Any questions? Not that I have any answers. Sorry, any questions? Or have I answered all your questions? Have I absolutely settled the problem once and for all? Yeah, this is a Hübner's, this is per capita. I take it a per capita indice or a graph measuring the reduction. Now you can see the spike in the last 20 years here is IT, solely IT. But I think it will go up when IT moves out of the grey box department and into things like mines and offices. Oh, sorry, AI. You can ask. Hey? Well, yes, clearly. They'll be the last to get the axe. Well, James and I both agree on this, that control of the most fundamental resource, which is land, which you need to stand on, particularly positional goods where it's desirable to live, and minerals, which basically provides the energy to run the system, will both be of huge value. And that's already happening. You know, minerals are already increasing in their relative share of the economy, and of course real estate's already gone through a huge boom, and it's likely that the struggle for positional control of these assets, there's a boom now in there's a big push on for agribusiness to control rural land, agricultural land. Lots of people big agribusiness buying up land in Latin America and Africa where it's undervalued. Lots of Chinese obviously buying up rare earths and mines and so on in Australia and elsewhere. So lots of people have already got onto real estate, every man jack. So there's obviously already been a major rush to get these positional exclusive resources.
So do you think the future work of real estate is not about the actual living space, but about the mineral resources?
Well, I mean, it's about both, you know. I mean, sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Look, I'm not a resource economist, you know, but all I can sort of point to is that I don't think the singularity will happen for another generation. That's my guess. But someone like James would have a better guess. So in the next generation, obviously you're going to get the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Arabia, and so on, which is 3 billion people, all getting the same type of standard of living that we have, right? So that's a massive drain on resources. Whether the planet can cope with that in terms of global warming is probably an open question, possibly not. But if that is where it's heading for the next generation. After that, it's opaque because we don't know what the energy requirements for a singularity economy will be. Since we don't know how humans will fit into it. I mean...
I had a question about that. So you talk about the reference model for the future economy as what China has done, and you talk about how you know...
Political economy.
Okay, the political economy.
Yeah.
But the political economy and the actual economy that has built China's success is built upon the fact that it has the biggest labour market in the world, and India.
It has the smartest labour market in the world.
No, they have the largest labour market,
And
not
the
the smart.
smart, yes.
Oh, bollocks. the smartest labour market in the world is in the US, has been for a long time. So now what you're seeing is the fact that they can use that value of human economy and the economics of human economy to develop manufacturing and industry. So
But that's an old economic model where,
Sorry, what's your question? I'm not 100%.
So my question is, if you're saying there and saying that the benchmark model that we should be using is the one
Not
that's
the
been able to
benchmark.
exploit human resources the best, then where are you saying we're going with this?
Well, maybe I didn't make it clear. What I'm saying is I think that... What I'm saying is I think that I personally think, and I think James thinks also, that it's somewhat unlikely that democracy... Well, I'll start again. In a singularity economy where machines are smarter than people, okay? Therefore democracy becomes in a sense superfluous because your decision-making, the best decision-making system is not going to be a human one. Therefore it won't be a democracy. You follow me? Because humans are forming, the mass of humans is the decision-making system. That's democracy. That's, well, but the premise we think is plausible that machines will be smarter. Now, the ownership of the machines in the case of China is the Communist Party owns the economy, or most of the strategic parts of the economy. But they may, out of a political sensibility, decide that it's a good idea to distribute some of that wealth. Whereas under the conditions of democracy at the moment, we have extreme polarization. It's not stopping the polarization, right? Democracy is not, the Wall Street got greater bonuses after the GFC almost, after the bailout. So that's insane. So democracy is not stopping the polarization, which is what Marx actually predicted. You need to have something else, something stronger to control the owners of the machines. That's all I'm saying. Also, I challenge your argument. China has the highest average IQ of about 105, except for Israel and Japan. And if you put 1 billion people of 105 IQ versus 300 million of 98 IQ, which is America, that has more overall brain power, that economy. And they're showing it with their supreme exertions in science and technology. Every single person in the Politburo is an engineer, bar none. Every single one. Why do you think? I don't know. Is that funny? I find that sad.
The way that China solves problems is to throw people at it.
No, it throws brains at it.
Yeah, that's right. People.
Okay, but eventually those people will make machines that are smarter than people. Then you're going to have to manage that. I don't know how to manage it. I'm simply saying that democracy is not going to manage it that well at the moment. Maybe, who knows?
I don't disagree. I don't see this as an argument about democracy versus communism.
Okay.
I see this as an argument about market values more than that. But
Well, a problem here is, and this is something James and I have talked about in our manifesto, is that the capitalist system, and Marx also said this, only measures profitability, right? I'll get to that in a second. It only works on profitability, right? And since our political economy is becoming more and more capitalistic, including, as we've seen after the GFC, we've had a reversion to 1930s economics, austerity economics. The Wall Street went on stronger than ever, right? So therefore, market values are so deeply embedded, and market values only measure profit. So humans are out of the equation. They're just resources. And if they become less cost effective, they go. The key thing here is whether technology, labour becomes a complement or a substitute for technology. Up till now, it's been a complement. Every time a technology improved, you had more people to operate it, programmers, technicians, what have you. But in the future, it may become just purely a substitute. How do we manage that? I don't know. The Chinese are at least thinking about the problem. I don't think anyone's thinking about it. Huh?
400-year blocks.
Sure. I think they're probably planning in 40-year blocks at the moment, though, because you can't see much further than 10 or 20, 30, 40 years. Okay, any other questions? What's that? That's
something Tony showed. It shows the...
Oh, sorry, you'll have to... You show it, James, because I haven't read that graph yet.
Can you show it to the camera? Can you find the mic at James?
general prosperity, and you can see that in the 1979 there was a market divergence. Although productivity is still skyrocketing, we've got a sudden levelling off of actual mean income, essentially the wealth.
Well, it's actually worse than that, that the median household income in America is now back at the levels of the late 70s. That's after nearly, 20, 30 years, right? It's
30 years, we've had an 8% rise in compensation as opposed to an 80% rise in productivity.
That's right. Most of that productivity gain has gone to the owners, which is as Marx predicted. So we have to take, I'm not saying I agree with all communism or everything like that. Pardon?
His economic analysis was unsurpassed.
He's socio-historical. I think he had a problem with his economic theory of value, which is a technical issue where he believed in the labour theory of value. But set that aside. The theory does not depend on the labour theory of value. It depends on understanding the dynamic between ownership of capital and the substitutability of capital for labour, and that at the moment is now going to go on an upward path. We're going to get.
He made a prediction that capitalism would eat itself, and I think capitalism by its very nature is going to do that because it's a competition to the top of the flagpole, and we're getting nearer to that point. So the speculation about what is going to occur after that, I say bring it on. I don't think there's any one right answer, but I think this is a very interesting scenario. But we can talk a little more about this, but
Anyway, there's no doubt that the latest, and yesterday's New York Times shows a fantastic polarization of wealth, where the 25% of national income in the United States is now taken by 1% of the population. That's about 3 times the historic average.
I should point out though, there are some academics that work in from the Swinburne Strategic Foresight faculty that work in the field of leadership. And there was a large conference in Zurich recently where some of the leading, the leaders of capitalism, the captains of industry, got together. To discuss a post-capitalist world. And they're now moving into sort of discourse around statecraft, because when there are no resources left to divide, when that competition is effectively eliminated, the only thing left to do is to transform into a state. And this is a scenario that Jim Data from Hawaii has been talking about for some time, where basically corporations become our new overlords, and it's sort of a neo-feudal reality, or a future feudal reality. I mean, do you see potential for that?
Well, what I see is corporations have a kind of a personhood in the economy. They have these sort of rights of citizenship in a way, but they're sort of, but they don't. They're just money-making machines, basically. They are machines. They're soulless machines. I like corporations because they are useful, but if they become an end in themselves, then there's no reason for humans to be in the economy. The economy can just be corporations trading with themselves, machine corporations trading with themselves in a mindless way, in a similar way that the natural economy is just all these bacteria trading with themselves and doing stuff. There doesn't need to be a soul or a consciousness in our capitalist economy. Our capitalist economy can be a soulless money-making machine. That's perfectly viable, and in fact, if you look at the kind of guys who are at the top, the masters of the universe, the hedge fund managers, they sure seem like sociopaths to me.
Well, the nice guys should rise to the top, and I think that you'll find that the system rewards people who are ruthless, and these are not new ideas. The question is, and it seems as though it's an economic reality, and if the captains of industry are discussing post-capitalist contingency plans, then we know that it pretty much has to be on the agenda. So, I'll talk a little more I'll go on a little more in my talk about where I think that might be going. But I think you're right. Like, we are in for very interesting times. I'll put it that way. The Chinese say, "May you live in interesting times."
think that is good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Been awesome.
Cool. I think, yeah. So, these guys aren't so interested. They feel as though do you mind going lower? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Alright.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm Craig, and this is
Wait a second. Are you sure you don't want to be videoed?
no videoing or audio on this one.
Then I guess we don't need this.